Hello and welcome to Just Keep Writing While Black,
a podcast for writers by writers to keep you writing.
I'm Marshall.
And I'm LP. And joining us this week for Just Keep Writing While Black, the third episode in Black History Month of 2023, is Arley Sorg.
Welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. What's up, y'all?
Well, we're glad to have you.
So, Arley, you know that I think that you're the hardest working man in speculative fiction. So I just want you to tell the people about all the things that you do.
All right. So I am co-editor-in-chief at Fantasy Magazine, which is a sister mag to Lightspeed and Nightmare. I'm also associate editor at Lightspeed and Nightmare, senior editor at Locus, columnist at the magazine in fantasy and science fiction, interviewer at Clark's World. I do interviews for my own site, and I do some kind of organizational stuff here and there and a lot of teaching. I'm the instructor for week 5 of Clarion West this year, for example, but I've done a lot of other little teaching and speaking gigs here and there.
Yeah.
Wow. That was a lot.
Arley. Arley does the damn thing. So words. Your background is multiracial, right?
Yeah. I'm half black, half white. That's the short version. I'm also a smidge of native, and the white is mixed, all kinds of whites.
Like,
you got these whites, you got that whites, you got the other whites,
the Caucasians decided Caucasian on this side, and the blacks decided black on this side. And I'm just
white side is very complicated.
That's fair. Yeah. So you're on because you hold such an interesting space in speculative fiction. I know that at one point you were a writer, but like all the editing work that you do as a journalist, right, as well as a fiction editor, you see the industry from a lot of different sides. And I've taken to calling you the Mr. Rogers of speculative fiction because you've Arley's affirmations and his affirmations are uniquely geared toward marginalized people in speculative fiction, and I just wanted us to have a conversation about how you got to where you are as the Mr. Rogers of speculative fiction, as the heart of the James Brown of speculative fiction.
Well, in terms of the affirmations, and in terms of being the Mr. Rogers, a lot of that comes from just seeing all the negativity and feeling like that's not who I want to be, especially, when I became co-editor at Fantasy, I gained like 3,000 Twitter followers. And it just made me really cognizant of the fact that what I say is going to have a different kind of weight than it used to. So I thought a lot about that. And I thought about who I want to be, what kind of message I want to be, and what sort of energy is already out there. And there was so much negativity. There's so many people who, their default is attack mode, or who just don't care, coming from the space of being a writer, in particular, a person of color and a queer person, just the baseline of that identity in not only in genre, but in writing spheres in general, is problematic because you are marginalized. You are in classes full of white people who don't know how to read your work and who are going to tell you, oh, I didn't get this because blah, blah, blah. And it's like, that's funny because everyone I know would get this, but you don't get it, And so think about all those things and entering that space and realizing that my voice is going to carry a different weight, for better or for worse. I just really wanted to not be another force of negativity. I wanted to counter that. And I wanted to, for what it's worth, for what little it's worth, because I don't think it's a lot. But, if I can help somebody to get through the day or to get through the writing or to get through even that moment and to realize that they're not alone and that somebody is here with them and that we all struggle. And that, the struggle is worth it. And they have to believe in themselves. They have to bet on themselves. If I can be a part of that, then that's what I want to do.
Strong choices. Strong choices. So we've talked about this on a one-on-one basis, but what? So now you are co-editor, senior editor, doing all those things.
Yeah.
How did if this is the endpoint ellipses, what was the beginning point?
I was just writing on my own. So the beginning point is really my mom. My mom, a Black woman who came from the ghetto, who had a very hard life. And I had a very bad childhood. And I didn't know a lot of things about my mom, but I knew she had a terrible, terrible, terrible childhood. And then one day I found her writings, not really knowing that she was a writer. And, I could see it. There is these really powerful, wonderful, terrible, painful fiction pieces and poetry pieces that she had tucked away. And I could kind of see it, she's a Black woman from the ghetto. She gave it a shot, but how much of a shot did she give it? Because how much did she believe she had a shot? And even in that era, how much of a shot did she really have? How many people were really reading it? And so that was the beginning. I always loved fiction. I always loved genre, but seeing her writings, and then my grandma on my dad's side used to have us just tell stories at bedtime to each other. So that was a big part of it. So I came into it with those things embedded in my psyche, and I came into it as a writer. And then in 2013, I went to my first convention, and I was terrified. I was like, I don't know what is going to happen. I don't know who these people are. I don't know what to expect.
Which convention?
Baycon, a local convention. And a friend of mine at the time, was like, fine, I'll take you, just stop complaining. And I met a lot of friends at that first convention and kind of got plugged in. And it was the right move for me. And the people that I met there became critique groups, became connections to other things. I learned about workshops. I went to Odyssey in 2014 because of going to Baycon and learning about workshops. And when I was in Odyssey, a friend of mine said, yo, this position opened up at Locus. Well, she is like a white girl, so she didn't say yo. But that's my re-envisioning. This is being changed for the purposes. But she said there's an opening, and because she had introduced me to a friend of hers, and we had done a couple writing sessions together, the friend vouched for me. I did like the most perfunctory interviews, got the job, and just stuck with that and met more people, went to more conventions. Basically, everything that I do is a direct result of meeting people at conventions and having a good attitude, asking questions, being friendly enough, putting myself out there. I'm shy. I'm an introvert, but I just, shut it down in the moment. And I'm like, I'm going to go over here and talk to this person, even though I'm scared shitless. I'm just going to do it because this is why I came to the convention. So I go over there, I meet the person, I talk to them con after con after con, ask questions, let them get to know me, get to know them. And, everything that I do is a direct result of that process, literally everything. So that's how I got where I am. And I don't know where it's going to take me. The thing that I've learned about genre and about people and about these positions is they're all ephemeral. I just wrote an article about this, for the FNSF. I wrote an article about magazines that were all noteworthy that no longer exist. So I looked at the Hugos from the last, I think it was 10 or 15 years or something, and just what magazines had been on there that had dropped off. And it was something like one third of them are now gone. And so it's like 1/3 of these notable magazines are gone. And there's all these important people that used to be important that nowadays nobody has heard of and that nobody cares. And one or two names are more enduring, but it's also ephemeral. So that's also goes back to the Mr. Rogers thing, which is like, if I want to have an impact, what kind of impact do I want to have? And what I want to have is an impact on people's lives. I want to help people get where they're going, because I'm a co-editor-in-chief at Fantasy now, but that magazine could be gone in a month, 2 months, a year. I could be doing something else. I could fade out. I could be gone. I could be the next scandal and no one wants to talk to me, or I could blow up and be like the next big thing who's winning all the awards. But it's all ephemeral, so you kind of have to. I think you kind of have to jump in and do what you want to do now while you can, and enjoy it while it lasts, because it may not be around. So that's the journey.
Huh. I have a question too, just since you mentioned conventions. We have a lot of people in our community, that, myself included, that go to conventions, workshops, stuff like that. I mean, I've been to, and not just conventions in general. I mean, I've been to San Diego Comic-Con like 8 or 9 times, but I've gone to writing conventions. I've done, and those kind of things as well. So a lot of the folks in my community who I have met are introverts, just like you described yourself, right?
Yeah.
So I know you said, kind of just push through it and talk to people, but is there any other advice you can give to people who maybe can't quite get to that point? Or should you travel in packs? Do you go with, you know what I mean? Like, what are some other things you can help folks with that?
Absolutely.
Just navigating conventions, because there's a lot of us that go and want to be there, but don't know how to. Is it BarCon only? Like, does BarCon help more than, going to panels, etc.?
Yeah, every convention is slightly different, and every convention you're going to get something different out of it, and it depends on what you're going for, what you want out of it, and it also depends on the nature of the convention and who's around and how it's structured. But yeah, there's some definite basic tips. I think going with someone is very helpful, but you need to go with someone that you can leave behind. Like if you're at a con and you're with the person you came with, and somebody says, someone that you really want to get to know and hang out with says, "Hey, do you want to grab a drink?" You don't want to have to be like, but my friend, you want to be able to say, "Yes, I definitely want to grab a drink," and text your friend and be like, "Hey, I'm going to grab a drink. I'll catch up with you later," Or if it's the right vibe, you say, "Hey, can my friend come?" But it really depends on the vibe, because sometimes it's going to be like the invite is for you. Sometimes it's like the invite is a little bit more open, and there are different kinds of social opportunities. So I think it's really good to go with a friend. But I think it's good to go with somebody that, you can occasionally break off and do your own thing. The main thing about being at a con, the main usefulness of it is to meet people. And it's not just, going to meet people to gain something is the wrong idea. Just meeting people for the sake of meeting people, making friends, vibing on as many people as you can vibe with, and going away with that is the best thing that you can do. And then if other things happen from that, that's great. And if nothing happens from it, that's fine too, because you met people, you learned things. But it's really important to get in that headspace of, you're paying X amount of money to rent the hotel, to fly there, to be there, to do these things. So, maybe you should actually do those things. And so every person is going to be different in how their introversion and shyness works, but you kind of have to find the tricks that work for you. For example, one thing you can do is practice outside of that highly charged realm where the stakes are really low, like at a coffee shop, with somebody who's sitting next to you, or a bar, or find different places where there is more of a natural pretext for you to talk to someone. For me, I used to wait tables and I used to bartend. So it gave me a natural pretext to talk to people. It wasn't easy. I still had that shyness and introversion, but I had an excuse. So I could always be like, "Yo, this is my job, right. Why are you giving me a problem?" But more importantly than that, it was practice for managing my feelings, which is what you have to do at the end of the day. Because at the end of the day, it comes down to that person is over there, whoever that person is. And you have the opportunity right now to go talk to them. And so you have to find the way to make that happen. Another way can be to do that with your friend. So if you find that person in that situation and you feel really intimidated, you can get your friend and go over there together and sort of approach the person together. Another way to do it is to invite the person ahead of time. For example, what I do sometimes is I'll look at the rosters at conventions. If I go to World Fantasy, I'll look at who's going to be at World Fantasy. And I'll think about, who do I really need to see that I've either never met and I really would like to meet, or that I don't see enough and I would really like to spend some time with them. And I will drop them an email. Hey, if you have time, let's get together for a drink or a meal or whatever you're up for. I leave it very open. I leave room for them to say, oh, I don't have time. I try to not take it personally, even though I still take it personally, but I try not to. I have feelings, because this is not about not having feelings. This is about managing your feelings and taking advantage of the moment, and realizing, like, this is how you do it. Because otherwise you go to 8 conventions, you see the people that you want to hang out with, and you never go talk to them. And they're not going to come up and talk to you. Like, if I'm at a convention, at a lot of conventions, there's probably, however many people I already know. I probably have a certain number of plans. I'm tired. I'm busy. I have panels. I'm teaching. I'm exhausted. I'm also going through my own emotional roller coaster. And so you can't sit over there in the corner going, why isn't Arley coming over and talking to me in the mass of like 50 people in the room, right?
Right.
You got to come talk to me or whoever it is that you want to talk to. So reaching out ahead of time is a great tip. And that way you can set the stage. And it's okay to be nervous and shy, but don't dwell on it. You can open with, man, I've read all your stuff. I'm a big fan. I'm really nervous. And then you move on from there. It's because they've probably been there. And the other thing is just realizing that most people in these spaces are also introverts. So you have it in common. They're nerds. You're going to find things to talk about,
Right.
So, yeah. I mean, I have tons of tips, but...
No, that's great advice. No, I love it.
And when I tell you that Arley is the hardest working man in science fiction and fantasy, I'm telling you, James Brown is on a schedule.
Yeah. I mean, if you see me at a con and I'm hanging out with a bunch of people, it's because I went up at some point and talked to them, most likely. Mm-hmm. And that's how we made friends. So you got to do the thing.
But it's a special thing in the world when you get that Arley email. Hey, I know that you're going to be at this place. Let's put it on the calendar. I'm like, all right, Arley, let's put it on the calendar.
Yeah. Let's plan something, because if we don't, we may not see each other.
Look, might be in passing. Might just be, hey, how you doing?
Get that side hug in the hall.
We take all hugs, but we know that the side hug means that you're in the middle of something, so it's fine.
Yeah, you get the side hug sometimes.
I sent Marshall the link to What You Might Have Missed, which is your Ignite Award nominated essay in the Uncanny Magazine from 2021, right?
Yeah.
I read it again a couple of days ago, and just thinking about like the ways in which writing is taught in the West that doesn't necessarily include everyone. Mm-hmm. In the previous episode, in Yvette's episode, we talked a little about how there's a lot of there's a little Shona and a little Ndebele in Yvette's collection, Drinking from Graveyard Wells, which is out next month, which is March. And it's fantastic. And how, like, in her MFA program, people told her that she should put a glossary in her book so that folks would be able to like understand the words. And the person who made that recommendation had Latin in her.
With no glossary. Just assume that everyone who can read would obviously know what she's saying.
Well, yeah, duh.
Yeah.
But there's a cultural disconnect when the language that we're talking about isn't Latin or English.
Yeah.
But there's also a cultural disconnect when the protagonists, aren't white and straight. And so I wanted to talk a little about the genesis of that essay, because I think it's really important And, it kind of read as a IYKYK, but I think it hit people differently. It definitely hit the marginalized communities squarely. And I'm wondering what your responses have been from from allies. Like, did they feel like they learned something, or what the responses been? I have a lot of questions. That was 3.
I mean, the responses have been entirely positive. I got no hate about it, which is really weird because I was expecting hate or at least some grumbling. Everybody was really positive about it. I got so many positive reactions from marginalized communities as well as allies. But I do think, and again, that essay was very much like, it always goes back to what sort of impact I want to make, if any, in genre. And that essay exemplifies, what I am trying to do as a person, as an individual in genre. But I do think at the same time, it's published in Uncanny. Uncanny has a certain readership. And so to a degree, I think it's preaching to the choir. Like the people who really need to read that essay probably don't even come across it. And I feel like the best people to read those essays, things like this, are the people who are kind of on the verge. Because I think the outright racists and the people who really aren't going to get it, it's not going to change the way they think. But I think the people that it might really change the way they think are the people who, are already starting to process similar kinds of thoughts. And so it could be meaningful and groundbreaking for them. And it could change the way that they do certain things. And I've had allies say, yeah, this made me look at this. This made me read this differently, blah, blah, blah. But again, those allies are probably going to get there on their own to some degree or other. So, I have mixed feelings about that, but about the utility of it, of the usefulness of it. But I'm also glad that so many people were fired up by it, because that is also an important part of it. Just even if I am speaking to the choir, there's a value in getting the choir excited. You know what I mean? And so I think a lot of that really came from working in the side of the industry of reviews and interviews and reading reviews, looking at different journals, looking at the way that things get interpreted over and over and over. And specifically, the trans author that I cited was literally, their story was, in my opinion, misinterpreted and given less than generous reviews because of it. And I see it all the time in reviews of people of color by white people, or, straight people by straight people reviewing gay works. I've seen it. I saw this cis het dude review this science fiction piece, which was about pregnancy. And the cis het dude did not get a lot of the sociocultural elements of it, especially the immediate animosity that women have to deal with around the issue of abortion. Like the cis het dude does not get that today, in certain places. This was before the Roe versus Wade thing, the repeal. He didn't get that even in that day, a couple years ago. There are places in the US where if you go to get an abortion, there will be people who want to hurt you simply because you want to get an abortion. And so because he didn't understand that as a baseline for a women's experience, he didn't get the gravity of some of the lines in that story. And so he misread it and gave it an inappropriate review. And so time after time I've seen that and thinking about, looking at, not just thinking about, because I look at statistics in short fiction magazines, looking at, just like the Black Specfic report talks about, looking at how few Black authors are getting published and thinking about the way that white editors are reading submissions by Black authors and by other authors of color. Not to mention, like, going back to the translation thing you were talking about, like there's this white editor who published this Black author and put footnotes in his story explaining, for example, the term red bone. And I was like, do not footnote red bone. Like, I get it, you're white. Google that shit. Yeah. You didn't footnote all these made up science fiction terms. you assume people are smart enough to figure it out.
Right.
You know how many millions of people know what the fuck Redbone is?
And for the listeners, when you Google Redbone, a photo of Marshall shows up, and so it's great.
Yeah. It's just like, think about translation and putting things in quotes, and the extra work. Going back to what Toni Morrison talked about, the extra work that certain types of people demand that other people make in order to make their pieces quote readable to them.
Mm-hmm.
And and it makes me angry, but I'm not the go on Twitter and rant type of person. I'm not the write angry emails type of person. I'm the type of person who wants to think, how can I do something constructive? How can I create positivity out of this? How can I try to help people who might be interested in learning? Because I know a lot of people aren't, but there's a handful who are. So how can I reach out to them and give them something tangible and specific and practical? Because we can talk theory all day and we can complain about shit, but unless somebody says, hey, here's this thing we can actually do, like it'll always stay at a certain level. When you take it to, here's this thing we can actually do. And so that's what I wanted to do with that essay, is make it positive, but also say, hey, here's this thing you can actually do. Here's something that you can do to help change this environment and to help change it for yourself and to help change it for each other. So that's what it was all about. And that's where it came from, is like, that stuff still happens today. I actually ran Yvette's essay in fantasy,
mm-hmm.
about African story structure.
Mm-hmm. In Ngano.
Yeah. And I ran Vita Cruz's essay about what was it? The inactive
mountains.
Yeah, the inactive protagonist.
Mm-hmm.
And so those things are all part of that whole picture of like communicating to people that because I could send angry emails to editors, but I don't think that's going to do much. I think it's more productive personally to create these spaces to have dialogue about different ideas, different ways to approach story, different ways to read things, and to offer practical things for people who do want to make things better.
I actually appreciated that about the essay too, is the fact that I don't know. I wrote an essay years ago in response to the George Floyd thing. And I was angry and frustrated when I wrote it. And it was interesting how many of my white friends came out of the woodworks asking me various things, right? Some were like, oh, I just want to sit down with you and talk to you about this, or, because they had some opinion they wanted to get across to me or something like that. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. But I find it interesting though, at the end of, but at the end of yours, you actually said, okay, so here's what you could do. And here's a whole list of things you can read. And I think that is a much more, and I like the positivity and I know LP put something in the chat while you were talking, like his response wouldn't be the same as yours, but I got to appreciate the fact that, that we have enough angry rants on Twitter. We have enough of all of this stuff. And I think I think so, LP, but I just think it's interesting.
I just don't appreciate you silencing me.
But I just think it's interesting how people will show up and be like, hey, so Marshall, you wrote this thing. And so I just think that I need to talk to you so that you can see that I think that I've never thought of you as a black man. I just thought of you as my friend. And I'm just like, yeah, I'm not going to have that conversation. That's not my conversation with you right now. But I don't know. I like what you're putting out there. And I think that's what we need. So
thank you so
appreciate
much.
That.
I really appreciate that. I do think I do appreciate the angry people too, and the people who get shit done and who make a stand and who create changes in their own way too. And I think that there's space for that. But I also think that sometimes people don't have the best intentions or motivations, especially on social media. Sometimes it's just an attention grab or a power grab, or they will take something in order to make themselves look like they're on a crusade for righteous cause, but really at heart, what is it? What is they really want? What is they're really doing? But there are a lot of angry people who've gotten a lot of great things done, and that, it's not my way, but I've seen them affect some positive changes. But I also don't think anger is, always the right response for every situation, and it's not the only response.
I talked to some of my friends who are newer writers or kind of in the dumps about their duotrope statistics, in that, like, you can get bumped a lot of times for stories that, like, I think are, subjectively really good. And one of the things that I have to remind my friends a lot of is that slush readers aren't necessarily taught to look for genius or innovation. They're taught to look for reasons to disqualify.
Yeah.
And I bring that up, and that's relevant because I don't know if everyone knows this, but at Fantasy Magazine, the editors-in-chief are the only readers at the magazine. So I wanted to talk to you a little about what the decision is to be slush reader and then story picker, co-story picker, and then, like, polish this thing up to put it on the magazine person.
Yeah. It comes down to seeing what other magazines are doing, seeing what the field looks like. A lot of people talking about, oh, Black Lives Matter, we support Black lives. But then you see the latest Black Spec Fic report come out, and it has all the facts, Like, you can say Black Lives Matter all you want. You can say we support diversity all you want, but those are the facts. And a lot of people, will talk a lot. But what actually happens? What are the results in what they're doing? And, as a whole, genre is not that, it's not doing that well with the diversity, especially for Black folks. And so it comes down to wanting to do a very specific thing at fantasy and wanting to do something very different. One of those things is about feeling like a lot of people get published because of who they are or because of their relationships. And for us, that makes the fields feel stale. Like, we read a lot of stories by such and such a name that it's like, okay, I don't know how this got published, And there's an argument for maybe the editor thought it was really great. But I think that there are a lot of cases where, the editor wanted a name and the name sent in a story. And maybe it was a trunk story, or maybe it was something they banged out. And the editor was like, cool, done, here's your check, And so we don't like that. We wanted a place that really is, publishes new, fresh, and a range of voices. And I can't tell you how many, like, we talked about going to cons, right? And I can't tell you how many times I went to cons my first year of going to cons. I met at, all the editors, basically, of all the magazines, all the big ones and some of the small ones. And they almost always will tell you, oh, I just love finding a new voice. And then you look in the pages, and again, I'm not just talking about theory, I've actually looked at these statistics. You look at the pages and you say, where are these new voices that you talked about? You say you love publishing new voices, but the percentage is very low. Oh, I love diversity. You say you love diversity, and yet the percentage is very low. Or it's always that, those 1, 2, or 3 names that always, what I'm talking about? We know who they are. And we love them. They're great people.
The ones that get trotted out on a regular basis. We do a great job. We publish the same 6 people.
Yes.
And I should also note that, like, my pro sales are all in reprints. So I'm just like, great.
Yeah. And so, Christy and I, when we first launched this magazine, we talked about a lot of things that we didn't like about the industry as it is. And then we were vibing so hard, and we were like, we should just start our own magazine. And we were like, yeah. And then that's how the magazine started. And so the decision to not use slush readers comes down to, we want to do a very specific thing. which is provide that space to new writers. To, in our pages, we don't care if you're famous, we don't care if you have a name, we don't care if you're friends of ours. We publish the work that we think needs to be seen, period. And as a result, you will see a lot of new writers in our magazine. You just will. I haven't run the statistics, but I guarantee you, if you run the statistics, we probably publish a lot more new or entry career authors than most magazines, most pro magazines for sure. We don't, I hesitate to say this because we don't come out and say, oh, we're about diversity and inclusivity, but we actually are, and the Black Spec Fic report shows it. And we were pretty happy about that, because we just want to be inclusive. We don't want to be another space that's saying, oh, we're so inclusive. And then it's like, well, where are the results? We would rather just give you the results and you decide what we're doing for yourself. Yeah. That's our mission. And I just don't trust anyone to read the way that I read. We don't trust anyone to read the way that we read. I'm afraid, like Shingai's story that we published in our first issue, I feel like, what if a slush reader passed on that, and that story had me bawling because the slush reader didn't read it right, didn't see what it's trying to say and what it's trying to do, and it's not that there aren't great people out there. And it's not that, people aren't brilliant or that people can't read or whatever. It's just that I only trust myself, and I don't know how to teach people to read the way that I read. I read across a bunch of spectrums, and the things that are my biases, like everybody has reader bias, but my reader biases are very different from 99% of all the other editors in genre. So I'm okay with my reader biases because it's going to counterbalance what a lot of other people are doing. And I also don't feel like, when I first was hitting genre, I was like, I was thinking like so-and-so should do this, such and such should do that. This market should be more diverse. This market needs more Black voices. They've published, there was one market I looked at, had 78 stories. They published 3 Black authors in the year that I looked at. 78 stories, 3 Black authors. Okay. So of course I was like, they should be publishing more Black voices. But at the same time, that's their magazine. It's a passion project. So part of me feels like they have the right to do whatever they're going to do. I can't force them to read differently. I can't force them to see things differently. I can't force them to be a different person, and if they ask me my thoughts, I'll give it to them. But what I can do is I can run a magazine differently. That's what I can do. So that's why we do it, because we know what we can do. We know exactly what we want to do. And it's a lot more work. And it means that, our submission process is a lot slower, but we feel like it's worth it because what we're doing is very different from what a lot of other places are doing.
I love that. I love that because there are plenty of writing courses. I feel like there aren't enough editing courses, or how to run a magazine courses, or bitch, here's a list of books you can read so that you're not like looking at this with the same white gaze as everyone else.
Yeah. The same white straights.
The same white straights. And it's like, oh God. It's such an interesting thing because I know I think about that when I submit. I'm like, all right, like on the one side, I'm like the pray and spray guy. So let's send it to all the simultaneous submissions at first. Yeah. And then the other side, I'm also like, is anyone going to like this quiet story? There's not an antagonist, but it has a lot of heart. And like, how do you feel about that?
I got a quick thing real quick. Please. In my program, literally today, we were talking to a couple of people that slush read and stuff like that. And we were so because obviously people are going to be interested in your magazine after this, what specifically, what keeps you, what are you looking for? What do you what do you? Should I not ask this question?
Ask whatever you want to ask.
Well, LP's shaking his head, so I don't.
I do what I want. I'm grown.
No.
Go ahead.
I was saying, so somebody that wants to submit to your magazine, what is it that specifically that you're looking for? What turns you off? What is like? And so, like you said, you look at things a little differently than other people. So, like, what is it about your process that is different than other slush readers? I guess is what I'm saying. Since you're not really a slush reader, since you're you know what I mean, but you're the person reading everything that's coming in.
Yeah, I'm reading the slush.
Yeah.
It really depends. I mean, we, like a lot of pro markets, we get a lot of submissions. And so we make a lot of decisions based upon the first sentence, the first paragraph, the first page, the first 2 pages. I would say most of the rejections that I sent out are based on, the first 2 pages at most. So I think, first of all, what we're looking for is that something has to stand out within that space. And back to what LP was saying about this quiet story, there's this old school way of thinking, which is that you have to have action, you have to have a plot, blah, blah, blah. But for me, that's not true. For a lot of editors, that's not true. It's not about any one thing. It's just about something standing out in some way that compels you to keep reading. That could be the prose, that could be the setup, that could be the character, it could be the setting, it could be the idea, it could be a combination of things. And I personally think some of the strongest writing is really doing multiple things in the space of the first paragraph when you start to analyze it and break it down. So you can have a quiet story. You can have a story that has no plot. You can have a story, you can have all kinds of stories, but something has to stand out. Something has to grab you in some way in the span of that first sentence, that first paragraph, that first page, and onto the second page. And from there, everything has to keep the momentum of interest, because there's an equation there too. If the interest generated in the very beginning is super strong, that might carry me through more of the story. But generating interest in that beginning is going to take me to the next page, but you have to keep maintaining some degree of interest. There's a balance there. What specifically that means can be so many things, because there really are so many kinds of stories. And we like to be surprised. I tend to like stories with an emotional core or a meaningful core. I like meaning in stories, but I've also bought stories that weren't that meaningful, but that did something really cool. So there's always exceptions to the rule. Just like, we're a fantasy magazine, so we're going to see hundreds of stories about witches. If we see 100 stories about witches, 95 of them are going to be more or less the same, and they're going to sound the same. But those other 5 are going to stand out in different ways, to different degrees and different levels. And so really, I think what it comes down to is that story standing out in some way that makes sense and that compels you to keep reading. That can be so many things. The things that are hard passes are racism, sexism, violence against women, etc., etc. A lot of times people will do shit that they, I'm a white guy and I want to write a story about racism, and I'm like,
no, stop.
I'm like, I understand why you think that, but 99.9% of the time, it is not doing what you think it does. And, 99.9% of the time, you are just, really getting on my nerves. And, so I've seen that a lot with men writing about women, or, writing about gender, or just straight dudes writing about gayness or whatever. I've also seen some unaware sexism, unaware racism. I saw this kind of love story once come in that was about mountaineering. I won't say too much because I don't want to do the make somebody public kind of thing. But, they wrote this love story that you could tell they felt it was beautiful, and that I think, it was a gay love story. And I think that most editors wouldn't realize how racist the story is. But I'm not most editors.
Right.
I'm like, and I wrote a rejection that said, just so you know, from my perspective, this is pretty racist. Here's why. And you can do what you want with that. You could call me an asshole or whatever, but here's the information that probably no other editor is going to give you, because, at the Pro Mags, you got me, you got Cherie. That's it. There's Fiyah. And he's not sending that story to Fiyah because he's a white guy. But
he might send it. He might send it.
But the fact that you said you told him that is important, I think. So
he emailed me back and thanked me. I've done that a few times where I told someone this is pretty misogynist. I told a guy once his story was misogynist. He emailed me back saying, "Oh, thank you. Actually, my daughter told me it was misogynist, and I rewrote it, but then I wrote it back." And I wrote back and said, "You should listen to your daughter." This whole thing would have been fixed if you just don't think that you're smarter than your daughter,
Right.
And now you can't resubmit it to me.
Yep.
Oh.
Yeah. So I think, people do things that they're not really aware of. And I don't always have time to explain to people, or the energy, because it does require a lot of energy. But those things are hard passes. And, I noped out really fast on a recent story that was like it was a straight guy trying to write about feminist issues. And it was pretty obvious that he didn't understand the ways in which he was being misogynist, even though he's trying to write about feminist issues. And so it's kind of like, you're not quite there yet.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Those are hard passes. But otherwise, we love to see things that we don't expect, or just, something new, something personal. I love things that feel really personal and true and lived in, but it doesn't have to be that way either.
Sure. Before we get to our last couple of questions, I'm going to ask LP if he has another one or two, but I'm curious too, because this is Just Keep Writing While Black. We do these episodes periodically throughout the year, but we do 4 in a row during Black History Month. And one of the things that we talk to folks about is just some of the, I guess what I would like to ask you though is like, there are barriers, there are issues that folks have when they go to publish, when Black folks go to publish. So I guess what I'm asking is kind of 2 questions. What are some of the barriers you might have encountered, but also some advice, considering your position now, for emerging Black authors to navigate this?
Yeah, I'll start with the advice, because in a way that's easier for me to talk about. The advice is be true to yourself, write the stories that you really want to write. And the barriers are real. There are people who are not going to read your story right. There are people who are racist. There are people who don't care. They know they're racist and they don't care. There are people who think they're not racist and they are. There are people who are going to bounce off, oh, this isn't in, quote, proper English, unquote, or this is a term I don't recognize, unquote, or they just won't get the subtext of this story because you're talking about something that they don't understand. So you could have a line in there that, that somebody who has the context. I think a lot about, for example, the experience of Black people going into a store and what happens, with a white clerk. Yep. And the way that I think about specifically in the thought of if a white author writes the line, the clerk checked me out as soon as I walked in the door. Depending on who the author is and who the reader is, they might read that as, oh, is it gay flirtation? But if you're Black, you read that as, oh shit, here we go.
Yep.
here we go. Like, and so you can write that line, and most of the editors at Pro Mags and a lot of the semi-pro mags are white. And so there's just so many things that you do not have to explain. And I want to encourage you to not explain it if you don't feel like explaining it, because you know that there are people out there who get exactly what you're saying. Yeah. You can explain it if you want to. It's your decision. You know, if you want to translate your experience for white people, that is up to you 100%. But I believe that you should do what you want to do and talk about what you want to talk about. I also believe that you should still send your stories out to all these markets, because what if it lands? Yeah. What if it sells? You know, the barriers are there. You 9 times out of 10, you're going to feel like you got rejected because of racism. Sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not. You won't know, and it's not important to know. What's important is that you keep sending your shit out, and that you keep going, and that nothing stops you. Because the only, you know, if this white editor at this magazine rejects you, that is not what stops you from writing. You stop you from writing. Yeah. You got to keep going. You got to find your audience. You got to find your people, and you have to build a name for yourself until people cannot say no, until you become one of those names that just gets those invites and it's like, hey, do you want to? And you're like, that's weird because you rejected everything I sent you, but now you're kissing my ass. Sure, I'll do the thing. Let's just move on. I'll take the money. Thank you. Yes. The answer is yes.
Give me the money.
Because that's how it is.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, a lot of my favorite Black authors never even submitted to a lot of the pro mags. That's something I realized when I got into the game a little bit deeper. I was like, damn, you know, like the world is missing out because this person's work is fantastic. And so few people are seeing it because it's only being published by people who know how to read this person. But that's the way it is. You self-reject because you think that it's not going to happen or you don't want to deal with it. And, you know, it makes you angry. Fine, be angry. Take the rejection. Send it to the next market. Be angry. Fine, but keep going. Don't let them stop you. That is my advice. Do you write what you want to write what you want to write how you want to write, whatever that looks like, but do not stop. But also challenge yourself, be real. Because I've also seen people be like, well, they rejected it because it's racist, because of racism. And I'm like, yes, racism is a thing, but honey, the story ain't there yet. It's not there yet. You need to put in the work now. Come on.
Yeah.
You're not as good as you think you are. Like, come on now. Put in the work. So that's the other side of it, is you got to work on your craft. So in terms of barriers for me, it's a little bit different. I hate the word passing because the word passing does not describe my experience. Obviously, I don't present as Black to a lot of people. It's very rare that somebody says, like once in a while, I'll be somewhere and usually it's an older Black woman. She'll look at me for a minute. I'll look at her. I'll be like, stop. She'll look at me. She'll be like, you Black, ain't you? I'll be like, no, I'm Black. Yeah. But 9 times out of 10, like I've even done interviews with people and I know they don't know I'm Black. So I'll say up front, by the way, I'm also Black. So, you know, we're going to take this wherever we take it, you know, because I can tell they don't know. Right. For most white people, I read as, you know, ambiguously ethnic. So the term passing isn't accurate for me because in my experience, I don't pass because I'm not treated as white, but I'm also not treated as Black. So my experience is somewhere in the middle where there is something else going on. At the same time, in Black communities, I'm also often othered and, you know, treated a certain kind of way. So in my experience growing up, I've had a very complex identity thing going on where I don't know where I belong. I don't always feel like I fit and I feel othered by everybody. You know, what, I'm queer too? Come on now. Yeah. You know, I can't even be queer right either. You know, I'm like a weird queer. Like I'm queer 90% of the time and then 10% of the time. And they're like, come on, are you gay or not? I don't know. Just shut up. Let me be me. So, but at the same time, I'll go to a convention and it's all white people and I don't feel like I belong. And then, always, 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 they're going to do those microaggressions. They're going to do those little racisms. They're going to be like, where are you from? No, but where are you really from? You're so exotic, blah, 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 blah. So I immediately get othered. So I'm not passing, but a lot of Black people will look at me and say, and they'll think, well, you're passing. And I'm like, that's not, I'm not living that same Black experience, but I'm not white either. And when I was young, I used to get pulled over by the police all the time. And I mean, all the time. We were pulled over once. I was in a car. There was 5 people. I was in the middle, in the back. And the white cop singled me out and questioned me. Yep. I'm in the middle, in the back, but everyone else is white. So this kind of shit happened to me all my life. I got pulled over on my bike. I got stopped by police all the time. At the same time, I was never afraid of getting shot. You feel me? Yeah. I was never like, oh, I'm going to get pulled over and get shot or killed. That was not my experience. But my mom, I was afraid for her getting shot. So for me, in genre, the barriers are different. I have a white name. If people don't know me, they see my name. So I'm writing, I don't always write Black characters. When I meet people, they don't assume that I'm Black. I am probably, for a lot of white people, a very safe version of Black for them. I'm a very safe, approachable version. I speak a certain way. I behave a certain way. I code switch, and for me, because I'm queer and Black, I have like 4 or 5 different levels of code switching, depending on the space. And so, the barriers aren't the same for me. And I think that's really important to know, because when we talk about how many people of color are editors at pro magazines, for example, and some people are like, oh, but it's getting better. And I'm like, it took Cherie like decades to get that spot and to get the recognition she's getting. And I am, aside from Fiyah, I'm like the only other person of color. And, for me, I'm like, if I'm what counts for Black on your scale, then you don't have any Black people, basically. I can't be the only Black person. I can't be the only person of color to represent people of color. That doesn't count. If you got like 10 Black people, sure, I can count as a Black person. I'm down. But if I'm the only person, you have no Black people.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, I don't count enough to to check the box, to be like, oh, we got a Black person. No, you do not. You need to do better than that. But I do think that people are like, oh, it's getting better. There's Arley, there's Cherie, and then they change the subject. And I'm like, no.
Devon, what about Devon?
Devon, there's Devon.
Yeah, now we're done.
Yeah, that's Fiyah. But see, I don't count them because they had to do their own thing. Like they had to, like nobody helped them. They had to build themselves from scratch. And so to me, they are an amazing institution of their own. Like they are defying the industry, if that makes sense. And the rest of the industry needs to get their shit together.
Indeed. Well, we're running out of time. I think we need to talk to you again for sure. That's not going to be the last question.
Okay.
No. We have 2 questions left. The first one is before you ask the last question, Opie. So people are going to want to find you. People are going to want to see your magazine and follow you on social media, since it sounds very much positive and amazing. So can you just tell people where they can find you, where they can follow you, stuff like that, and we can put it in the show notes?
Yeah. On Twitter, I'm at Arley Sorg, ArleySorg. My website is arleysorg.com. Fantasy magazine is fantasy-magazine.com. And those are the best places to go to find me. And, wherever you go, it doesn't have to be me. It doesn't have to be fantasy. Find the work that you love. Find the authors that you love, the magazines that you love. Support them. Tell your friends about them. even if it's not me, wherever you find your favorite works, let people know about them.
Awesome. And then LP, I'll let you ask the last question now.
Okay. We're just chipping over each other. It's good. So the last question that we ask writers when they're on is, what just keeps you writing? But what just keeps you writing and or editing?
Yeah. It's just the feeling of making a difference in the world, to be honest with you, even if it's small. Like when somebody says, that tweet made my day, that helped me out. Like, that's what keeps me going, man. Honestly, it's important to me. And as long as I feel like I'm making a positive difference, I'm going to keep doing it.
Awesome.
Thank you for coming in, Arley.
Yeah, we can't thank you enough for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's been really special. I really appreciate your time and your attention and your questions.
Awesome. And we got to do this again because you're awesome.
Thank you.
And maybe I'll see you at a con, right?
Yes, we need to hang out. To hang out. I'll introduce you to everybody.
Yes, that'd be awesome. And this has been Just Keep Writing, a podcast for writers, by writers, to keep you writing. You can find us at justkeepwriting.org. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Feel free to reach out to any of us on our social medias, and please jump in our Just Keep Writing Discord channel. Links to all of that is in the show notes. Lastly, please support our show by going to patreon.com/justkeepwriting. We offer daily writing prompts, early access to podcast episodes, and much more. Thanks for listening, and just keep writing.